I never thought selling a simple pot could change my life, but that's exactly what happened. My son had moved on with his life, leaving me alone with nothing but memories and the recipes my husband loved. I thought I was just letting go of an old kitchen item until the person who inspired my every meal walked through my door and became the reason I dared to hope again. For as long as I can remember, my kitchen has been the heart of my home. Long before life taught me loss, it was where my husband and I shared our quiet mornings, our late-night laughter, and the small, sacred rituals of everyday life. Even now, after all these years and the ache of his absence, the kitchen is still mine, my sanctuary, my safe place, the one corner of the world that still feels untouched by loneliness. I love cooking. Not just because it fills the stomach, but because it fills the soul. There's something magical about measuring flour, kneading dough, or letting the aroma of simmering spices drift through the air. Each recipe carries a story. My husband, Peter, loved it all, even the mistakes. He would taste a dish that didn't quite turn out right and smile anyway, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's the thought that counts, Evelyn," he'd say, wiping his fingers on a napkin. "And this? It's full of love." Sunday mornings were my favorite. Peter would hum an old tune while reading the paper, the smell of coffee mingling with butter and cinnamon. Our son, Andy, still half asleep, would shuffle in, hair sticking up, asking if he could lick the spoon. The kitchen was always alive, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of laughter, the warmth of sunlight dancing across the counters. Back then, I believed that kind of happiness was permanent. That love, once built, never faded. But life has a way of reminding you that even the strongest foundations can crack. After Peter passed, the silence was unbearable. The house felt too big, the air too still. For a while, I couldn't bring myself to cook at all. His chair by the table sat empty, the sound of his laughter replaced by the hum of the refrigerator. But slowly, almost out of instinct, I returned to the stove. I found myself cooking as though he were still here, setting 2 plates, tasting sauces aloud, talking to the air as if he might answer. It wasn't madness. It was memory. Each meal kept him close, each recipe a small prayer that love never truly disappears. Cooking became my way of surviving the quiet. The rhythm of chopping vegetables, the scent of rosemary and garlic, the sound of bubbling stew, it all grounded me. It gave my hands something to do when my heart didn't know where to rest. And in those long, lonely evenings, there was one familiar voice that kept me company, Adrian Greystone. Every night at 7 p.m., his show filled my living room with warmth and comfort. I never missed an episode. I knew his mannerisms by heart, the way he sprinkles a pinch of salt, the subtle flick of his wrist when he flips a pancake, the warm, encouraging smile he gives as he tastes a dish. His recipes are deceptively simple, but they carry a depth of flavor that speaks to the heart. He teaches more than cooking, he teaches patience, attention to detail, and the joy of sharing a meal with someone you love. Sometimes I'd speak back to him as if he could hear me. "Too much salt, Adrian," I'd mutter, laughing softly to myself. Other times, when he'd say, "This dish is about love, about who you're cooking for," I'd feel a lump in my throat, because for me, there was no one left to cook for anymore. Over the years, his show became more than background noise. It became company. On days when the silence felt too loud, his calm voice filled the emptiness. He reminded me that beauty could still exist in small things, in a simmering pot, in a well-worn recipe card, in the act of stirring love into something simple. It may sound silly, but Adrian Greystone became part of my story without ever knowing it. He was the reason I kept cooking. The reason I still found joy in flavors, in creation, in care. I try every recipe he shows. Some are disasters, some are edible, and a few are pure magic. I make notes in a little leather notebook, the edges frayed from use. I scribble down my tweaks, a dash of cinnamon here, a hint of lemon there, until the dish feels like it has my own signature woven into it. And even when the meal doesn't come out perfect, the act of cooking itself comforts me. Flour-dusted counters, the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the hiss of a sauté pan, it's like therapy. The kitchen becomes a place where the past and present meet, where love lingers like the smell of fresh bread cooling on the counter. My son, Andy, grew up with this world around him. He watched me stir, whisk, and taste. He learned my habits, my little quirks, the way I hummed while preparing our meals. He was always supportive, always smiling, always telling me that one day he would take me to meet Adrian Greystone himself. That promise, small and unassuming though it was enough for me. I lived for those evenings, imagining Andy and me standing side by side, learning from the man whose recipes had filled our home with warmth for so many lonely nights. For years, life was simple and content. Andy provided for us both, and I gave him the comfort of a home filled with love and, of course, food. We didn't have much beyond the little house we lived in, but it was ours, and it smelled of rosemary, fresh bread, and the faint sweetness of my husband's favorite cookies. Even after his passing, those scents were enough to make the house feel alive. Then, Andy married. At first, everything seemed fine. His new wife was kind, polite, and seemed to appreciate the food I made. She complimented the meals, admired the little touches in the kitchen, and asked questions about the recipes. For a while, I felt relief. Maybe this change wouldn't hurt us. Maybe we could all grow together. But slowly, the warmth started to fade. Complaints replaced compliments. "Mom," she said one afternoon as I unpacked groceries, "why are you buying so many ingredients? You're wasting money. You don't need to try all these fancy recipes from that chef." I tried to explain, gently, patiently, that cooking was more than ingredients. It was joy. It was memory. It was love. But my words fell on ears that didn't want to listen. The tension grew. Meals became battlegrounds. I felt judged for doing the thing that gave me life. The kitchen, once a sanctuary, began to feel smaller, colder, as if it could no longer hold my heart. And poor Andy, he was caught between us. I could see it, the way he'd rub the back of his neck when Emily sighed or how his smile faltered when I tried to make conversation. He wasn't unkind, just tired. Torn. He wanted peace, to be a good husband, a good son, but he couldn't seem to be both at once. I saw him shrinking a little each day, bending under the weight of choices he didn't know how to make. Sometimes I'd hear them whispering behind closed doors, Emily's voice low and weary, Andy's softer, trying to reason. I never listened for long, I didn't want to, but every word that slipped through the cracks told me the same thing. I was becoming a burden, a reminder of a life that didn't fit their new one. One evening, after a dinner filled with uneasy silence, Andy lingered in the doorway as Emily went upstairs. His hand rested on the frame, his eyes tired but kind. "Mom," he said quietly, maybe take it easy with the cooking. Emily's just worried. About money. About space. I nodded, pretending to understand, but inside, something wilted. Cooking was all I had left that still felt like me. After that, I noticed the distance growing. Fewer shared meals. Less laughter. The TV stayed off during dinner, even Chef Adrian's voice, once our background comfort, was replaced by the dull hum of silence. And then came the day Andy moved out. Not angrily, not shouting, but quietly, decisively. He took control of the finances, leaving me behind with nothing but the little I had saved. My son, my companion, my reminder of the love I still had to give, gone. After Andy moved out, the house felt like a hollow shell of itself. I would wake up to an empty kitchen, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. The cupboards were nearly bare, the fridge practically echoing its emptiness, and every sound, the drip of the faucet, the creak of the floorboards, reminded me I was alone. I tried to keep busy, tidying what little I could, but even the familiar act of cleaning felt meaningless when there was no one to share the space with. I would sit at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring out the window at the garden Andy used to help me tend, imagining him walking up the path, laughing, asking about dinner. But there was no laugh, no footsteps, no words. Just the empty street, the flutter of leaves, and the ache in my chest. Nights were the hardest. I'd make dinner for two and eat alone, my husband's memory hovering in the corners, a reminder of what I had already lost. For a while, I stopped cooking altogether. The stove stayed cold, the spice jars gathered dust. The smell of rosemary, once my favorite comfort, now only brought tears. The kitchen, my sanctuary, felt haunted by everything I had loved and lost. Yet every evening, I would still turn on the TV at 7 sharp, watching Adrian Greystone's show in silence. His voice filled the room the way laughter once had, soft and steady, guiding through recipes I no longer had the heart to try. He would smile at the camera, stir a pot of stew, and say something kind, something that always felt like it was meant for me. "Food connects us," he'd say. Even when words fail. And I would sit there, hands clasped around a mug of cooling tea, letting his words sink into the loneliness. I wanted to cook again, to feel that joy, but the spark just wouldn't come. Watching him was all I could manage, a quiet ritual that reminded me of who I used to be, even if I wasn't ready to return there yet. Money was scarce. I counted coins for groceries, skipping ingredients, rationing flour and sugar, wondering how long I could keep going. I sold little things at first, a teapot here, a mixing bowl there, each one a piece of my past I reluctantly gave away. The first few were bearable. But then, when the photos of the cookie jar, the vintage coffee grinder went up online, I felt as if I were selling parts of my soul. I would stare at the empty shelves, the bare counters, and feel the sharp pang of reality. This was my life now. Lonely. Forgotten. Reduced to what I could barter or sell to survive. Even my memories seemed to ache, lodged in the objects I had parted with. I would catch myself reaching for Andy's mug in the morning, only to remember he no longer lived here, and my hands would fall back to my lap, trembling. Some nights, I would wrap myself in the old apron I had worn for years and wander the empty kitchen, touching the counters, imagining laughter and warmth that had vanished. I would whisper into the air, telling myself that I had done my best to keep our home alive, that I had loved enough, cooked enough, fought enough, and yet, the silence answered me with the emptiness of loss. Even the small joys of cooking, the sense of herbs and roasting vegetables, seemed muted without someone to share them with. Each stir of the pot reminded me that I was preparing meals for no one but myself, each clink of a spoon on a bowl echoing in a hollow space that once contained love, life, and family. I wept silently, not even bothering to blot the tears, because the walls of the kitchen had become my only witnesses. And finally, I reached the last thing. My hands trembled as I held it, the vintage cream enamel Dutch oven my husband had given me on our first wedding anniversary. It had been his favorite, the one he insisted I use no matter what. "This will last a lifetime, Evelyn," he had said, smiling. "And if you take care of it, it'll take care of you." Tears fell freely as I took a picture and typed the listing, vintage Dutch oven, cream enamel. Well loved and cared for. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, remembering the times I had baked bread for him, stews that filled our little home with warmth, the countless dinners where we laughed at nothing at all. But the bills didn't wait. My stomach ached, my heart ached, yet I pressed post. Even in my grief, I remembered the little joys. I pictured the recipes I had mastered, my rosemary bread, my grandmother's apple pie, the subtle spice mix I added to a simple stew to make it taste extraordinary. Cooking had always been my language, my way of showing love when words weren't enough. Adrian Greystone's recipes had inspired me to experiment, to perfect, to keep living. There was the herb-roasted chicken he demonstrated last week, the delicate panna cotta I tried 2 nights ago, the garlic rosemary focaccia that reminded me of a street cafe I'd once visited on vacation. All these things filled my evenings with purpose, even as the house grew quiet around me. The kitchen, once a place of joy and warmth, now echoed with emptiness. I hummed softly to myself while cleaning the counters, trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing. The Dutch oven sat on the counter like a monument to my past, a symbol of love, memory, and life I could no longer afford to hold on to. And yet, now, my hands shook as I placed the Dutch oven carefully in a box for sale. The very thing that carried my husband's memory, my love, my history, the final piece of me that remained, was about to leave. I stared at the listing, imagining the person who might buy it. Someone who would appreciate it, who would give it a new life. But I also feared the emptiness it would leave behind. My kitchen would feel smaller, colder, less alive. Even the aroma of freshly baked bread, which had comforted me through so many lonely nights, could no longer fill the silence alone. And through it all, I kept thinking of Adrian Greystone. His calm voice, his gentle instructions, the way he encouraged viewers to take risks in cooking, to make mistakes, to create with love. If only he could see me now, standing alone in a kitchen full of memories and empty cupboards, trying to survive with nothing but my recipes and my heart. I never expected a simple message could make my heart leap in a way it hadn't in years. And yet, there it was, appearing on my phone like a small ripple in the quiet pond of my lonely life. "Hello, ma'am. I'm interested in your vintage Dutch oven. I collect enamel cookware for a culinary museum. Would you be willing to sell it? I can pick it up myself. Fair price guaranteed." I stared at the screen, reading the words again and again. Polite, meticulous, almost formal, yet something about them felt familiar. My pulse quickened, my chest tightened, and my fingers trembled slightly as I typed back. "Yes, I'd be happy to. Please let me know a convenient time." I pressed send and sank onto the kitchen stool. The flutter in my chest refused to settle. A few seconds later, the notification chimed again. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. I'm actually in your area today. Would it be all right if I stopped by this evening? Say, around 5? I stared at the message, the clock on the wall ticking steadily beside me. 5. Just a few hours from now. My hands went still on the countertop. It had been so long since anyone had visited, even longer since I'd invited someone in. After a pause, I typed back. "Yes, that's fine. I'll be here." His reply came almost instantly, polite and warm. "Perfect. Thank you. I look forward to meeting you and seeing the Dutch oven in person." I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. The house felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker with a mix of nerves and something else I couldn't quite name, anticipation, perhaps. Who was this man? And why did his words feel so personal? Hours passed. I moved about the kitchen, busying myself with small tasks, wiping counters, dusting shelves, even baking a simple recipe I had perfected over decades, just to remind myself I still could. But the house remained heavy with silence, every creak and hum amplified in the emptiness. Almost on impulse, I did something I hadn't allowed myself in weeks. I unpacked the Dutch oven from its box, still gleaming in cream enamel, and set it carefully on the stove. The plan had been to send it away, to let go of the last tangible piece of my life with Peter, my husband, my partner, my love. Yet here it was, sitting in the center of the kitchen, a vessel that had carried not only countless meals but decades of memory. I filled it with water, added rosemary and garlic, and slowly, deliberately, cooked one last stew. The aroma filled the kitchen, rich and warm, curling through the air, stirring memories of Sunday dinners, laughter echoing across these walls, Andy's teasing for adding too much salt. Steam rose and danced in the sunlight that streamed through the small window, and for a brief, bittersweet moment, the kitchen felt alive again. I stirred gently, remembering the first time Peter had given me this pot on our wedding anniversary. How proud he had been when I carefully lifted the lid and stirred the stew for the first time. I had kept it through all the years because it wasn't just a pot. It was him, it was Andy, it was all of the life I had built with them. And now, it was the last thing I had left to sell. Once the stew simmered and the memories had settled, I carefully cleaned the pot and placed it back in its box. The lingering scent of herbs and roasted vegetables clung to the kitchen, a silent witness to what had been, and what was about to be let go. Then, a knock. My heart jumped violently. I paused mid-breath, staring at the door, fingers frozen on the doorknob. Every instinct told me to brace for disappointment, for a stranger. But something deep inside stirred, an almost irrational certainty that this moment, whatever it was, would change everything. I opened the door, and everything stopped. There he was. I recognized him immediately, though part of me couldn't believe my eyes. Adrian Greystone, the very chef whose voice had guided my lonely evenings, whose recipes had kept me company when Andy was too busy with his own life. He stood there, calm, polite, and impossibly real. The sunlight caught the faint glimmer of his watch and the neat lines of his shirt. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. I felt a sudden clumsiness, my knees weakened, a pan slipped slightly in my grip before I caught it. He raised a hand slightly in greeting, a small, deliberate gesture that seemed both formal and kind. "Hello," he said gently. "I'm Adrian Greystone. I believe this is the Dutch oven you have listed for sale? May I come in to take a look?" My chest tightened. Adrian Greystone. The voice I had watched for years on TV, the man whose recipes I had cooked for years, was here, in my doorway. I couldn't speak. My breath caught, and all I could do was nod, stepping aside slowly. As he crossed the threshold, the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the lingering aroma of rosemary and garlic from the stew. The Dutch oven, packed yet still warm from my last meal, sat silently, a witness to years of love, loss, and memory. My hands trembled, and I forced a steadying breath, trying to act normal, though my mind spun. He glanced around, his gaze soft but attentive, noting the empty shelves, the few items I had kept, and the faded recipe cards pinned above the counter. There was no judgment in his eyes. Only curiosity, respect, and something else I couldn't name. He walked slowly, deliberately, like a man savoring each moment. His eyes paused on the Dutch oven, fingers hovering just above the enamel. There was no rush, only quiet admiration. "It's beautiful," he said, almost to himself. "I can see it's been well cared for." Then his nostrils flared slightly as he inhaled the lingering aroma. His eyes softened. "Did you cook this?" he asked. "May I taste it?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. My lips parted, but no words came. I felt the warmth of his presence, the subtle scent of cologne mingling with the cooking aroma, and suddenly I was a girl again, standing in my mother's kitchen, wishing for approval, wishing for guidance, wishing for something I couldn't name. I nodded slowly, my hands still trembling slightly. "Why, yes, of course," I whispered, stepping aside to let him approach the stove. My heart pounded so loudly I could almost hear it echo in the small kitchen. The humble pot on the stove, smaller, ordinary, nothing like the Dutch oven, simmered gently, filled with rosemary, garlic, and vegetables. The aroma curled through the air, warm and inviting, carrying the faint traces of the memories I had stirred into my cooking over the years. For a moment, I watched the steam dance in the sunlight streaming through the window, trying to steady my breath. He leaned closer, eyes fixed on the pot. The rising steam framed his face, softening his features in the afternoon light. For a moment, he simply observed, deliberate, patient, as though he could sense the care poured into each meal I had cooked, even in this small, modest pot. "It smells incredible," he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. "You've captured something authentic here." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. Did he know how much of myself I had poured into these simple meals, these quiet evenings spent alone, cooking to keep memories alive? I lifted the lid carefully, letting the fragrant steam escape fully into the kitchen. The scent of herbs and slow-cooked vegetables filled the room, enveloping us both. I ladled a small portion into a simple bowl and placed it before him, my hands shaking slightly. He picked up the spoon, eyes flicking up to meet mine, and tasted. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. I watched every subtle shift in his expression, the widening of his eyes, the brief pause, the almost imperceptible nod, as though the flavors themselves spoke to him. He set the spoon down and looked around the kitchen again, not at the empty shelves with the few items I had left, but at the details that revealed my care, the faded recipe cards pinned above the counter, the traces of flour and herbs, the way the sunlight caught the small pot on the stove. "It's more than a recipe," he said quietly. "It's a story. And it's beautiful." A warmth I hadn't felt in years rose in my chest. The ordinary pot on the stove, simple as it was, had become a bridge, carrying my memories, my love, my quiet devotion, now recognized by someone who understood. He glanced at the counter, then gestured toward the small chair nearby. "May I sit?" I stepped back, nodding. The kitchen, once quiet and hollow, felt alive again, bathed in the aroma of cooking and the soft afternoon light. He lowered himself onto the chair, eyes never leaving the little pot, yet aware of the care woven into every corner of the space. I held my breath, waiting for him to taste again, to say more, to confirm that the hours and love I had poured into cooking had not gone unnoticed. He settled into the chair, eyes still fixed on the small pot simmering gently on the stove. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply observing the kitchen, the sunlight catching the steam as it curled lazily upward. I held my breath, heart hammering, as though even breathing too loudly might break the fragile magic of the moment. Then, his gaze shifted to me, soft and intent. "Would you allow me to taste it again?" His voice was quiet, deliberate, almost reverent. I nodded, my hands trembling slightly as I ladled another small portion into a bowl. The aroma of rosemary, garlic, and slow-cooked vegetables wrapped around us, warm and comforting, and I placed it carefully before him. He picked up the spoon with gentle care, pausing for a fraction of a second to savor the anticipation. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then he tasted. I watched him closely, noticing the subtle movements of his eyes, the brief lift of his eyebrows, the tiny shift in his posture, the way he leaned just slightly forward as if trying to absorb not only the flavor but the love and history behind it. He set the spoon down slowly, closing his eyes for a heartbeat, as though the taste had unlocked a memory or an emotion he hadn't expected. "It's remarkable," he whispered. His voice trembled slightly, filled with awe. "It's not just food. It's history, memory, love. You've poured yourself into this, haven't you?" I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I had spent years cooking alone, perfecting recipes from Chef Adrian Greystone's shows, creating my own small touches, stirring memories and devotion into every meal. And now, for the first time in years, someone truly understood. He glanced around the kitchen again, at the faded recipe cards, the small traces of flour and herbs, the sunlight glinting off the humble pot. "Every detail tells a story," he murmured. "Every choice, every touch, it's beautiful." For a moment, the kitchen felt suspended in time. The humble pot on the stove, ordinary to anyone else, had become a bridge, connecting my quiet, lonely life to someone who had seen not just the cooking, but the heart behind it. He leaned back slightly, eyes still on me, a gentle smile forming. "May I stay a little while? I want to understand more. To see how you've made this magic here." I stepped back, nodding, my chest swelling with warmth. The kitchen, once hollow and silent, now pulsed with life, the aroma, the sunlight, the faint clinking of utensils all mingling with a sense of recognition and wonder. In that moment, I realized that something ordinary had become extraordinary, simply because it had been seen, tasted, and understood. He leaned back slightly in the chair, letting his gaze sweep over the kitchen again. "Tell me," he began, his voice soft, how did you learn this recipe?" I swallowed, unsure if I should say anything, but the warmth in his tone coaxed me to speak. I told him how I had watched his TV shows for years, carefully noting each technique, each nuance. I admitted that I had made small changes over time, a pinch of this, a dash of that, until the recipes became my own. He listened intently, nodding, eyes never leaving me. "You've made them yours," he said quietly. "And yet, I can see the original heart of the dish shining through. It's incredible." I felt my chest tighten. Did he really understand the countless lonely evenings I had spent in this small kitchen, perfecting dishes that no one would ever taste except me? He smiled gently, as if reading not just my words, but the emotions behind them. "I can tell you put more than ingredients in these meals," he said, leaning forward slightly. "There's care, there's history, there's love. It comes through in every bite." I looked down, suddenly shy under his gaze. No one had ever spoken about my cooking like this. Not Andy, not anyone. And yet here was Adrian Greystone, the very chef whose voice had guided my evenings, acknowledging the heart behind my work. He continued, gently asking about other recipes I had tried from his shows, curious about how I had adapted them. As I spoke, I realized I was telling not just a cooking story, but my own life story, my late husband, Peter, my son, Andy, the years of quiet devotion in this kitchen. He listened with rapt attention, absorbing each detail without judgment, letting me feel seen. "This is extraordinary," he said after a pause, voice thick with emotion. "You've taken these recipes and made something entirely unique, something real. Something people can feel." I looked up, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. He smiled softly, adding, "It reminds me why I became a chef in the first place, to capture not just flavors, but moments, memories, connections." My throat tightened. The little kitchen, the simple pot, the humble meals I had prepared in silence, they were being recognized, appreciated, validated. And in that recognition, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. "You know," he continued, leaning back, "your story, your recipes, they deserve to be shared. Not just here, not just in this small kitchen. People should see what you've created, feel what you've poured into it." I blinked, unsure what to say. The idea was almost too big to imagine, yet his words carried a quiet certainty. He paused, watching me carefully, then added with gentle warmth, "I want you to know, everything here, the care, the memories, the flavors, it's seen. It's valued. You've built something remarkable." For the first time in years, I felt entirely seen. My kitchen, my meals, my quiet life, they were no longer invisible. And in that moment, I realized that something small, humble, and ordinary could carry extraordinary meaning when recognized by someone who truly understood. Then he said something I never expected, "I don't want to buy the Dutch oven." "I can't, but I want you to keep it. What I want is to show the world your story." My heart skipped. Could this be real? The thought that my little life, my decades of cooking quietly in a modest kitchen, might matter to others felt almost dizzying. He continued, explaining that he wanted to feature me and my recipes on his next TV special, Home is Where the Recipe Begins. His words painted my quiet life as inspiring, as if my love for cooking, my resilience, and my creativity could touch the world. "People need to see the heart behind your dishes," he said. My pulse raced. TV? Me? I'm just Evelyn, a widow who loved cooking in the evenings, who lived for memories and the quiet ritual of stirring a pot. Fear rose in my chest. Who would want to watch me? What if I'm not enough? My hands trembled slightly. I looked at the packed Dutch oven sitting on the counter, my last tangible piece of Peter, my past, my life, and realized how far I'd come emotionally. I'd endured loneliness, the empty cupboards, the weight of loss. And yet, here I was, being told that my life, my cooking, my story, had value. Adrian noticed my hesitation and smiled gently, resting a hand lightly on the counter. "It's not about fame or technique," he said softly. "It's about authenticity. Your story, your cooking, your love, that's what matters." I let out a shaky breath. Slowly, his words sank in. My simple devotion, my quiet life, it was powerful. It mattered. For the first time in years, I felt I could trust someone else to truly see it. The filming day arrived. I stood nervously in the studio, Adrian beside me, the cameras capturing my every move. My heart thumped. Cooking in front of an audience, sharing memories of Peter, Andy, and all the recipes I had perfected, it was overwhelming. And yet, Adrian's gentle smiles, his quiet encouragement, and his steady presence gave me courage. Each step I took, chopping, stirring, tasting, felt familiar and extraordinary all at once. The aromas, the rising steam, the sizzling sounds, it was my kitchen, magnified. For the first time, I felt proud of what I had created. My love for cooking, my dedication, my story, they were being seen and appreciated. The episode aired. My face, my smile, my kitchen, my recipes, they were on TV, shared with the world. I watched myself on the screen, amazed at how small, humble moments of my life had become something beautiful for others to witness. After that, invitations came. Other shows, other kitchens, other audiences eager to learn the recipes I had kept close for decades. Eventually, I even got my own show where the recipe begins with Evelyn. A dream I had never dared imagine, and yet, it was mine. Sometimes, Adrian would stop by during filming days. He'd walk onto the set with that same calm smile, teasing that my kitchen looked warmer than his ever did. We'd cook together again, side by side, teacher and student, though by then, it felt more like equals. He'd taste a dish, close his eyes, and nod approvingly, saying, "You see, Evelyn, people don't just taste your food, they feel your heart." Those moments always brought me back to that first day, the day he showed up at my door, when I thought my story had ended. Now, every time he appeared on my show, it felt like life had come full circle. And then there was Andy. I didn't need him to acknowledge me, but I could sense a shift when he called one afternoon. His voice carried a strange mixture of pride, regret, and awe. I'm happy for you, Mom," he said. "I should have taken you to meet him. I promised you that once, and I let you down. I left you behind, and I didn't realize. I didn't realize how strong you'd become on your own." A lump rose in my throat as he continued, voice catching. "But hearing your voice now, seeing everything you've done, the life you've built. I'm proud, Mom. More than I can say. You're happier, stronger, and more amazing than I ever gave you credit for. And even though I wasn't the one to help you get here, I'm so grateful this happened." I listened quietly, letting the words sink in. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need his approval. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of quiet relief, and of a love that didn't need to be earned anymore. I whispered softly, "Thank you, Andy. That means more than you know." I looked around my kitchen, at the Dutch oven sitting proudly on the counter, at the counter where I'd spent decades cooking, at the aromas lingering in the air. Peace washed over me. What was lost in one chapter, my quiet, lonely kitchen, my life before recognition, had found its way into the world. I smiled, feeling the weight of the past lighten. I was ready for a new beginning, carrying memories, love, and recipes into the next chapter of my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Have you ever held on to something not for its value, but for the memories it carries? For me, it was the Dutch oven. What's the one thing in your kitchen that still smells like home and keeps your memories alive? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. And if my journey touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of hope and the little moments that change everything. Thank you for joining us today.